It's a Slushy Stop. Take evasive action.
Hello and welcome back to Slushy Stop. I am Nathan Elder, joined once again by Alex and Jake to talk about Star Wars Return of the Jedi. I say welcome back because I'm assuming you've been keeping up with our series so far. If not, I strongly recommend you go back, start at the beginning, because what we're doing is we're just three guys having conversations about each Star Wars movie, leading up to a grand finale where we go head-to-head playing Star Wars Trivial Pursuit to see who is the Grand Master of Star Wars knowledge. So let's go ahead and jump right on in, and let's get going on Return of the Jedi.
Ooh, eat,
Okay, no one's going to take that and run with it, so let's move on.
There's no need to run with it. Like, it is so magnificent on its own.
The best scene of the saga. Best addition George Lucas ever made.
Best scene in that movie.
Yeah, see, that's not where I want to start. Let's start. I want to start with, we've talked about this movie a little bit before we even started recording, and I think it's become clear that Jake, I think he's even gone on record to say that this is his favorite out of the original trilogy, or at least it's up there.
Yeah.
Alex has said that it's probably his least favorite of the original trilogy, or it is in fact. There is no maybe.
It is. It is in fact. Right. No, it's not. It's not alleged.
Yes,
it is.
It is a hard fact that it is his least favorite of the original, and then I'm just somewhere in the middle. So this may very well just be an argument between Alex and Jake with a little input for me. I don't know. Let's find out. So I guess let's start with Jake. With what are the shiny, bright spots of Return of the Jedi?
Well, for me, like I've mentioned to you before, I think this movie is paced very well. I went back and rewatched it earlier this week as well in preparation for this, and I noticed that you're on Tatooine for a while, and then Luke goes to Dagobah, and then they end up on Endor, and then the Death Star. But while you spend a lot of time on these planets in these different respective places, whatever, at least to me, it feels like it goes by very quickly, and I think that's part of why I like it so much. There aren't very many slow moments, but I mean, even when there are, arguably the Yoda death scene, the whole Dagobah part's kind of a slow part of the movie, but you've got that big reveal of Luke and Leia being twins and all of that. So yeah, for me, it's the pacing, and I would argue that the Luke Vader fight at the end of Return of the Jedi is actually better than the one in Empire. I think Mark Hamill, just his acting during that scene is just incredible. I think it's probably the best work he did throughout the trilogy.
The thing for me, I think part of why I'm in the middle is because, yes, it does have some pretty high points for the original series, which is hard for me to dislike it too much. However, I do recognize the flaws. And so with that point, Alex, your thoughts?
Let me start by saying I agree with Jake that, and I'll actually go a step further and say that the Vader-Luke lightsaber fight is probably my favorite lightsaber duel of the whole kit and caboodle. Like, all of them. Anakin Obi-Wan, Darth Maul, Yoda Dooku. To me, the Luke-Vader lightsaber duel is my favorite. I think it's the most emotionally packed duel of the whole series. Mm-hmm. So, there's certainly parts about Return that I love. Oh boy, the Ewoks, though. I was watching it.
I knew it was coming.
I watched it last night to get refreshed, and as I was watching it, I started to think, maybe Jake's right. As I was watching the movie, I was like, this is really not as bad as I remember. And then they got to Endor, and then they met Wicket. And I was like, oh, yeah, actually, like, this is the part. This is, and no kidding, at that point in the movie, I was just like, I hate this so much. everything about it, everything about the Ewoks to me is egregious, and I hate them. And I think the acting from Luke, Leia, and Han falls off a little bit. I agree with Jake about, I think Mark Hamill delivers a great performance. I have a real problem with Han Solo in Return of the Jedi and Leia. Like, Leia turns into, she goes from like this spunky, like, I'll fight you anywhere, anytime, plucky rebel in A New Hope and Empire to like a soppy person who needs to be held in Return of the Jedi. And I absolutely hate the changing of her character. And I love the Emperor. Watching it again last night, let me tell you, I love the Emperor in this movie. I love him. But there are just some things about the movie overall that I don't like Endor. I wish it had remained Kashyyyk. I think that would have been a much more interesting story and a much more interesting plot point. But anyway, I don't want to honk all the time. But those are the beefs that I have with it. I think the whole Jabba thing takes way too much time.
To your point about Kashyyyk and Endor, I do agree. If that had been, if those had been Wookiees instead, I think that would have been awesome. Mm-hmm. That said, I think if he had gone with Wookiees in Return of the Jedi, I don't know that it would have turned out as well as it did in Revenge of the Sith, because I just don't know that it would be as believable. Because Wookiees are, if you put one, to use a practical costume for one, Chewie is a practical costume, it looks great. But when you've got, hundreds of those, it might start to get a little ridiculous. So that's one case where CGI is maybe the better alternative. And I think that the Kashyyyk parts in Revenge of the Sith are better for it, because you've got those huge action set pieces that you could not have had in Return of the Jedi.
I do completely agree. And watching the movie, I understand why they chose not to use Wookiees in Return. Absolutely. However, and you said the word, so I'm going to use that same word, believable. I find it impossible to believe that an army of Ewoks could successfully mount an attack on Imperial troops. Completely, in that universe, I find it completely unbelievable. They're literally throwing rocks at AT-STs. Although, to counter your point there are some points where, I agree, just dropping rocks on their helmets, and the stormtroopers are just sort of like stumbling around, like, that's pretty funny to see. How did they know? Rocks!
But think about how clever it is when, they have those different traps set up, and that one AT-ST comes to walk through it, and they chop the two ropes or whatever, and those huge logs come in and crush things.
But are we supposed to believe that trap has been set for weeks or months, or that they hurriedly put that together knowing that this was coming? Or what are we supposed to believe? Because it is cool looking, but I was watching that last night and I was like, wait a minute, did they just, because those look like freshly cut down trees, did they do this in the last 20 minutes? Is this and maybe that's an Ewok special skill. Maybe they're phenomenal at cutting wood.
Ewoks are like beavers, they just have really big teeth hiding under all that fur that they
also there's
these teddy bear people are phenomenal lumberjacks. You wouldn't believe.
That's why the Empire was there. They were there to harvest that their productivity. And another thing about it, and I don't want to linger on the Ewoks, but another thing about it that's weird to me is the hierarchy of intelligent beings in this universe. Because the Ewoks are repeatedly talked to, even by the rebellion, like they're idiots. They're this, and I get it, they're a primitive species, but it's there's kind of a weird division between intelligent beings in this universe and and something that we talked about the other day, and we can segue right into, is Salacious Crumb. How are we supposed to know in this universe what is a highly intelligent, high-functioning being and what isn't? And I think the Ewoks, for me, because Wookiees, we know, are highly intelligent, high-functioning, can do whatever, can do anything anybody can. But Ewoks don't seem to have the ability, and, it's weird to me.
So let's take that thread then to go back to Jabba's palace and the beginning of the movie, because after watching it again myself, I'm still in the camp that yes, the beginning on Tatooine is a bit long and, I don't know, excessive in some ways. Very inefficient storytelling, because obviously the whole point of Tatooine is to do two things. One, to rescue Han Solo, and two, to show that Luke has come into his own as a Jedi. Yes, he's not technically a Jedi Knight yet, but he is, much further down his path than he was when we last saw him. And I feel like we spend so much time between C-3PO and R2 going there first, then Leia showing up, then Han getting let out, then Chewie, we just all, it takes almost 15-20 minutes just for Luke to show up, and then even when Luke shows up, it's okay, he has to fight the Rancor, and then we finally get out to the Dune Sea and the execution, which I thought was funny. Jabba says something about how, you will be executed immediately, but now we're going to take this long trip out into the Dune Sea to actually kill you. It's wait, hold on. If you want to execute them immediately, why didn't you just go ahead and shoot them right there and be done with it?
Yeah.
So the whole thing, I timed it. I mean, it takes about 30 minutes just to do all of that, where, I don't know, I guess as a storyteller, filmmaker, what have you, it just feels highly inefficient that we should have been able to get to that a lot sooner, that, cut out the Rancor battle, a few other things, just kind of cut to the chase a little bit more.
Jabba no one.
I mean, yes, and there's some great little bits in there, don't get me wrong. C-3PO and R2 going down into, that droid area, meeting that grungy...
Oh, no! Oh, no!
Yeah, there's some great bits, but at the same time, it's what's the point, ultimately?
Well, the point of the Rancor is to sell toys. We've talked about about George Lucas's his focus shifting a bit to, he was very concerned with, what can we make into an action figure. And, I know I showed you, Nate, the other day. That Black Series Rancor that came out 10 years ago was pretty cool looking. So I'm kind of okay with him doing that in that situation, because it did make for some pretty cool stuff. As far as, it taking forever for them all to get there, I do agree. It does. It's lengthy. Like I said, I'm not going to contradict myself. To me, it seems like it goes by fairly quickly, but maybe I'm looking at it through a different lens because I like that movie as a whole so much. So maybe to me it just feels better than it does.
You're a little
to you
more
guys.
forgiving of it than some of us.
Yeah, maybe. But that said, just thinking, apart from the filmmaking, storytelling aspect of it, when you're thinking about it practically, I guess, from a strategic standpoint on their part, it makes more sense for them to go in waves. Whereas if the droids, Leia, and Luke all show up at the same moment, then there's a lot more room for error and a lot more room for them all to be captured at the same time. Whereas if they do it one by one, I don't know, I feel like there's some sort of strategic practicality there from a soldier standpoint.
Watching it last night, and to your point, I think it takes too long, but I was watching it going this is a really good plan. This is it's basically a Trojan horse plan.
Exactly.
You're sneaking, Luke is sneaking his troops into Jabba's palace, and they're going to attack from the inside. It's actually really smart, and strategically it makes a lot of sense. What I think happened is, I think it goes back to an Empire Strikes Back problem, in that Han either should have died or not been frozen and taken to Jabba's palace. Because what happened is they wrote themselves into a corner that none of us would be satisfied if that movie starts out with Han Solo free and them saying, "Boy, sure glad you came and got me, kid. Thanks. Now I owe you one," or something like that. None of us would have been happy with that. So it was they had to show him getting out, and the plan is really smart, and the plan really works, and it's believable. So I don't know that it's a problem that can be solved.
That was one question that I had, is what exactly was Luke's plan? Because he first walks in there, And is what plan A to just negotiate with Jabba and get everybody out there without, resorting to violence? And then plan B is, okay, yeah, let's resort to violence, which is not exactly a very Jedi way of doing things. First of all, the Emperor talks a lot about, use your aggression. Yoda warns him, don't give in to aggression, and yet it seems like his plan B, C, whatever it is, yeah, I'm just going to attack people, not out of self-defense, but just out of aggression.
Well,
to free my friend.
Let me say, I think that's very much in the Obi-Wan style of doing things, because Obi-Wan in the Clone Wars is, famously the great negotiator, and then you have him being famous for being able to solve things diplomatically, but when he can't, he will fight you. And he will win. So I think that's Obi-Wan. Maybe that's Obi-Wan's influence on Luke's philosophy. I think also it's important to remember that Luke grew up not far from Jabba's palace. So growing up on Tatooine, he is very familiar with Jabba the Hutt, and he knows that Jabba is a bad guy.
Very true.
Who straight up, he knows Jabba's not going to negotiate. I think that's what we're supposed to take away. Luke knows. He planted his lightsaber on R2-D2. He knows exactly what's going to happen. He's familiar with Jabba. And, it's, think of your hometown and think of the big bad guys in your hometown. That's what Luke's dealing with here. He knows this guy. He knows his name. He knows his reputation. And so, he's there to fight, basically. I think there's no question. We see how quickly he gives up on diplomacy. I think he went into it kind of 3PO knocking on the door, knock. Oh well, they're not going to negotiate. I think that's kind of what's happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and sort of piggybacking off of that a little bit, I think one cool thing that Return of the Jedi does in going back to Tatooine is, like you said, Luke grew up not far from Jabba's palace. This is where he's from, and I think the point of going back to Tatooine is really to show. Luke's maturity as a Jedi, but also just to show how far he's come in life, and that he's no longer a victim of his circumstance. He's not stuck on his aunt and uncle's moisture farm anymore. He has gone on to do so many better things, and he's grown so much as a person. And I think the whole Tatooine bit shows that a lot. And even you get to the when they're going out on the sail barge and Luke says to Han, I was born here, and Han says, well, you're going to die here, and Luke's just follow my lead, or, something like that. So, he has a different confidence than he did the last time we saw him on Tatooine.
And aesthetically, last time we saw him on Tatooine, he's dressed all in white. This time we see him on Tatooine, he's dressed all in black. That, I don't think that was a coincidence. And let me just, one more thing before we move on from Tatooine. Going back and watching it, I really love the sort of Egyptian, there's a very Egyptian sort of Palestine type feel to Jabba's palace, and you have the stone and the masonry and the sandy floors, and even some of the decorations, you got the chimes hanging up and all that. And so I'm just going to say, going back now, I hated it at the time. But going back now, I really appreciate some of what they were doing there with the desert and things like that.
Well, it's funny you mention that, because I know I mentioned this to y'all already, but one thing that stuck out to me this time as far as the decorations go is there's this quick shot on Jabba's sail barge where you actually have a stone-carved picture of Jabba with a harem of women. Something that I never noticed it before, but it almost makes sense because Jabba is a gangster,
yeah.
And so as a gangster, he loves the ladies, and he even has a picture of himself with them. But it totally fits into that aesthetic that you're talking about. But it's just kind of funny because it's one of those hit or miss things. I literally had to pause it and go back to make sure I saw it correctly.
That's awesome.
So be on the lookout for that next time you view it. But the other thing I wanted to point out too is, talking about how going back to Tatooine allows us to revisit A New Hope, and because it all rhymes like George Lucas likes.
Shit rhymes.
Another way in which it rhymes, I noticed too, is in the very beginning after the opening scroll, you pan down and you have the Star Destroyer come in the exact same shot as you had in A New Hope, where it's this giant thing that's overshadowing the top of the frame before then the shuttle comes out. So clearly, from right off the bat, they are immediately trying to call back to A New Hope and remind you that this is where we came from before we, arrive at the ultimate conclusion. So
I noticed for the first time a couple of things in this one also that are direct callbacks to A New Hope, and it's Luke's plan involves putting Chewbacca in handcuffs and using him as a way to get into the enemy to place that they were trying to go, just like on the Death Star, and Luke and Leia swinging on a rope across something. Like, that's a direct wink back at A New Hope. And I've never noticed. I've seen the movies 1,000 times, and I've never noticed those two things. So it's funny you say that, because you're right. That opening, there's a lot that's happening that the movie makers are wanting us to draw parallels to A New Hope.
For sure. Now, before we get away from Jabba's palace, I do have to point out and remind our viewers, listeners, whoever you may be, that I'm a purist when it comes to Star Wars, although this last time I was watching the special edition, which means that I got to witness that wonderful song in Jabba's palace, jack full of CGI and extra footage that is completely unnecessary. And just that song, to Alex.
The song is called Jedi's Rock, by the way.
Do you think that's what they called it in the palace? Do you think they're like, so here's a new song that I was working on last week, as he's like tuning up his thing, like twing, twing, twing. It's called most of you never met a Jedi. I was actually in a bar a few years ago, and this old guy cut off this guy's hand with a lightsaber, and that's when I wrote this song, so I hope you guys enjoy.
But I guess I pointed out to show that it's another one of those examples where it seems like, now granted it was a special edition, so George Lucas was just revisiting the series, but just cramming stuff in there just for the sake of it. I don't know if it was for toys or just because he could. And I would say overall part of what kind of brings down this movie for me, or at least what sticks out in contrast, whether it be the Ewoks or things like this, is it almost has a little bit more of a childish tone to it compared to, something like, obviously an Empire is direct contrast to it, but it's very offsetting later on, especially when you have this very dire situation going on where, Luke is trapped in the throne room, fighting for his soul, while his friends are going to get killed off, the rebellion's going to get killed off. Just this dire situation, and then we all of a sudden come back to, Ewoks playing around. Yeah, Chewie and the Ewoks swinging onto a ATST and all those shenanigans, and it's just like
an Ewok hitting himself in the head with a rock.
Yeah, just and overall, like, I'm fine with the concept of this big bad empire gets taken down with the aid of a primitive species. Like, I get that concept, but they just take it too far at times to where it contradicts that dire situation that has been developed.
Do you just have some traumatic experience from your childhood involving teddy bears, and that's why you're so prejudiced?
No, I'll have you know that I have pictures proving that as soon as I was born, I was given a teddy bear.
I'll have you know,
I loved and everything. So no, sir, I love the teddy bears just as much as anyone.
That is a soundbite if I've ever heard one. I love the teddy bears. Return of the Jedi. Man, what great potential. But I agree, there's so many things that just why? And then how useless is Boba Fett? The dude is completely useless. For one of the most menacing and feared bounty hunters in the galaxy, he's completely useless in the fight.
What bothers me the most and granted, this is a recent annoyance about the movie. I'm going to say recent as of within the past year. Boba Fett, you could say he got phasma'd. He was this character that we see so little of previously, and he looks so cool, and then we want more, and it's like, oh well, we don't have space, so we just kill him off.
Yeah.
Like happened to a particular Chrome Stormtrooper that we were all very fond of coming out of The Force Awakens. But yeah, I will agree. He comes across as very, very useless after especially after what you see of him in Empire. You know, you only get a handful of lines. It's very little, but he has this menacing voice, and he just sort of stands there and looks sinister and whatever. And even in Jabba's palace, the few shots of him, like he's just standing there. You know, everyone else is partying and having fun, and he's just sort of looking around, surveying the scene.
And what's worse too is in the special edition, they even add in that extra scene where he's like flirting with the singers and everything before
touches
he
their
walks
face
over. He's like, "Hey, ladies, I got to go do my job now," and then. Oh yeah, it is a major letdown. But you know who else is also useless? That entire other skiff that was out there. I mean, it's funny how like they're just joyriding around, like they're literally going yeah and everything, while this serious moment is happening of this execution.
Yeah.
They're just driving around constantly, and then when the fight actually breaks out, they're late getting to the party. You know, a good minute or two after Luke's basically killed everybody else on the other barge. Then
I do really love the orc that pushes Luke off of the plank. Like the dude looks just like an orc from Lord of the Rings.
He does.
Just the ugliest creature I've ever seen. And I don't know. I like to think that that's a Lord of the Rings Easter egg.
Well, speaking of Easter eggs, after watching it with my wife this time, we have dubbed the Raincore handler Space Hagrid.
Oh, that's good. That's
You're a Rancor,
like it.
Harry.
Yeah, that whole part's
Fluffy.
weird. That's the strangest dynamic. Like
I want to loop back to Boba Fett for just a second because I'm going to say it. I do love the nod that Boba Fett gives undercover Leia when she wins the negotiating battle, and Boba Fett's like well done. Like I like what you did there, kid.
Boba Fett approved.
I respect you as a bounty hunter.
I thought that was a really nice touch. I think one of the best things about Return of the Jedi is the exchange between Luke and Yoda on Dagobah immediately after all that. Like the movie is, to me, Return of the Jedi is worth watching for the Luke and Yoda scene and the Luke and Vader fight at the end. That's why I watched that movie.
And honestly, I think for me, that's part of why Tatooine seems to drag on too long for me, because after having the big reveal in Empire Strikes Back that Vader is Luke's father, you know, at that time, it's kind of one of those questions where, like, is he or isn't he?
Yeah, that's a good point.
You don't actually have any confirmation in that movie, so, like, this is when we actually get that confirmation that, yes, he is, in fact, Vader. And so I want to get to that answer rather than, you know, playing around on Tatooine so much.
Man, I love the Yoda Luke, that last conversation. I find it a little weird that Luke calls him only by first name at one point. I guess he doesn't have a last name, but other than that, like it's just such a great moment in the film, and I love like, is Yoda or is Vader my father? Like, because we forget, because we're living now, you know, we forget that, yeah, if you're Luke, you probably have been wondering, like, am I sure? Is he just messing with me?
Yeah, was that just a trick to get Luke to join him on the dark side?
Yeah.
Or was he telling the truth?
Your father is.
And I would say that that's definitely one of those scenes where it really becomes apparent how expressive Mark Hamill is. There's just so many little emotions that, you know, go across his face during that scene, between concern and the acceptance of the truth, and even afterwards with the conversation with Obi-Wan as well.
Yeah, I love the Yoda and Luke scene there as well, and he's, you know, Yoda's this wise Gandalf, Dumbledore sort of character that, you know, demands the utmost respect, and the fact that he's still humble enough to make jokes, I think is brilliant, and you know, it makes him seem more
relatable.
humanizes. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I'm looking for. Yeah, it just humanizes him a bit more, that he's not, this god or anything like that.
He's not the emperor.
Yes, there you go.
I think that's a cool juxtaposition.
Well,
like, he's not the emperor. He has so much power, but he's not caught up on
And
it.
it's also the fact that it shows how strong Yoda is, because look at what he's been through. I mean, he was basically the leader of the whole Jedi Order, and then he survives through their eradication, and then has lived alone in exile on this swampy planet for, by this point, like 25 years or so. And he still, I think, very much blames himself sort of for a lot of the mistakes of the Jedi. And he's been through a lot, but he still has he hasn't let it defeat him. And I think, obviously, like, I like that line for the comedic value, but it's also the fact of how much it says about Yoda.
No, I think that's a great point, and it's something that I've never actually actively thought about. But now that you say it, I think that is subconsciously why. Because I have never watched these movies and felt like Yoda was to blame for everything that happened. Although really he kind of is in many ways. Like everything that happens in the prequels, a lot of that falls squarely on his shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
Yet you're right. He has a humble attitude about it, and he doesn't let it defeat him. Instead, he's like, well, we still have Luke. I still have a shot. I can do this one. I can do this one thing, and this might reconcile all of the bad.
Yeah.
Although I was watching it last night, I kind of got a little cracked up because I was like, as he's dying, he's struggling to get out. By the way, there's another Skywalker, and then he dies. But then it's like, why is he so worried about getting that out before he dies? Because he's just going to come back as a Force ghost. Like, in 5 minutes from now, he'll be able to tell you that it's a Force ghost. I don't know why it's so important that he gets it out right now.
It's convenient, to be honest, as far as plot goes, but it gives Luke more drive, because jumping ahead to that Luke and Vader fight, after Vader says, if you will not turn, perhaps she will, and Luke screams and jumps from under the stairs. Like, there's a whole new intensity to him. But I think Yoda just he understands, like, he needs to know this now, because Luke is so he's struggling a lot with this, and I think Yoda knows that telling Luke this will be that extra push that he needs, because even if he doesn't want to confront Vader, he will want to save his sister.
Mm-hmm. He has to protect his sister at the very least.
Exactly. But yeah, it's also just a convenient plot device to help out later in the movie. So when Vader basically threatens Leia, then Luke can be like, "Oh no, I don't think so."
Yeah, he totally baits Luke with it.
I love that the way all of that comes together, and like, what a heart-wrenching, if you like allow yourself to really dwell on it, what a heart-wrenching situation where, like, so you have a twin sister.
Mm-hmm.
This line right here, Obi-Wan was wise to hide her from me. Like, whoa. I think that's one of those moments where you realize that, like, Vader is he's really bad. Like, I know that we all know that, and we're supposed to know that, and he's a character, but in some ways he's also a caricature through much of the movies. But, like, that line right there, like, Obi-Wan was wise to hide my own daughter from me. Like,
yeah, that's dark.
That's dark. And, like, a brother fighting his dad to protect his sister, like, the drama and the tension in that fight is like, you have a brother, like, literally doing everything he can to protect his loved ones from his dad, who, like, should be the one trying to protect his kids, but, like, since he's obviously not going to do that, and then Obi-Wan's failure now is complete, or his Obi-Wan's failure is complete. And also, one thing I noticed, that he keeps referring to, Obi-Wan has taught you well, Obi-Wan has taught you well, and then I remembered, oh, that's because they still think Yoda's dead. Like, none of Vader nor Palpatine know that Yoda is alive and has trained Luke. So they think that he's been under Obi-Wan's tutelage this whole time, because Vader keeps saying Obi-Wan has done a great job. And anyway,
so to sort of add on to your point of Vader should be the one protecting his own children and everything, and how dark that is. That sort of plays into what I think might actually be my favorite scene in the movie. I love the scene on Endor when Luke goes to Vader and they just have that conversation, and
yes.
and Luke says, I know, Father, so you've accepted the truth. And Luke says, I've accepted that you were once Anakin Skywalker. And Vader says, that name no longer has any meaning for me. And then, later on in the conversation, he says, it's too late for me, son. Like,
yeah.
While Luke sees the good in him, he really sees no future for himself. He's very much accepted his
that's a great point.
Position as, he knows that he is just a monster. He is a machine. He doesn't have any humanity left, and so it doesn't matter to him if it's his son or his daughter or what. I think it's solely like, you have my blood and I'm strong with the Force, so that means you will be too. So you will be a great weapon. He doesn't view them as people; they are weapons.
Yeah, because and Obi-Wan says that, right? He says the Emperor knew, as I did, that should Anakin have children, they would be a weapon to him. And he says him, and I've always thought he was talking about Vader, but I realized this time Obi-Wan says because the Emperor knew if Vader had children, the children would be a threat to Palpatine. Be a threat to Palpatine. I always thought that meant a threat to Vader, but it doesn't. It's a threat to Palpatine, because obviously, I mean, what could draw out a man's humanity? What could draw out a man's light side other than like his children? And the fact that Obi-Wan knows that if the Emperor would have killed them, he would have killed them just like he would have killed Padme had she not already died, because I think he would have, caged them and tortured them until they became dark side followers as well. And the fact that like you kind of have, that's just a whole interesting situation where like you have Anakin realizing like, I have thrown in my lot with this guy who has cost me my wife and cost me my, basically my life and my arms and legs and my ability to walk around without a mask and a suit on, and now he's literally going to cost me my children right before my eyes. Like, how much do I let this guy take from me?
And I think that's the driving force for Vader to ultimately kill Palpatine, is he has the realization, like, I've given this man everything and he just continues to take from me, and I've had enough.
What I found interesting, though, about that Vader-Emperor dynamic is a couple times in the movie, the Emperor refers to Vader as my friend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree. Almost as equals.
Yeah, it's almost like one of those like awkward situations with your boss where your boss thinks like you're friends, but you're really not because you have so many problems with him. It's almost kind of the same thing where that's what it feels like at times, where it's like, yes, my friend would do this, this, and this, where secretly inside his helmet, Vader's like rolling his eyes because he does not agree with anything the Emperor is saying.
It also strikes me as like it's a toxic relationship where the Emperor, like, what are you doing kneeling? You know you don't kneel before me. Come on, get up, let's go. But then later on, he talks to him like an idiot. So it's like, it's definitely an abusive, toxic relationship where like he makes sure Vader never knows like where he stands with him. Like, cause you're right. 1 minute you can definitely sense that like, come on, you're my friend. But then as soon as something goes wrong, like he's ready to throw Vader under the bus. And that's a total power move. That's a toxic relationship at work where like he keeps him guessing all the time. He never lets him get comfortable with their relationship, I think.
Well, and clearly one of Palpatine's greatest assets is his ability to manipulate others. So whether it's Vader in those ways, or even later on Luke in the throne room.
One of the great things, and that's a good point, and I think one of the things that I've often wondered is like, is Luke wiser than Anakin? Because Luke sees through the lies, he sees through it all. But then I think like Luke's reaction would not have been possible without seeing Vader's outcome. Like, Anakin didn't have the benefit of seeing someone that Palpatine took and tortured and like used, but Luke gets to see Vader, and so Palpatine is like threading, he's sowing this big bright future where this can all be yours, and Luke, all he has to do is look at Vader and go like, no way, dude, like why would I want that? And Anakin doesn't have the benefit of that. So I think I've always been very hard on Vader and been like, God, this, like, Anakin's such a moron. He falls for this, this scheme that Palpatine has laid for him, where Luke obviously sees right through it. But then you have to, like I said, you have to realize that Luke has the benefit of seeing someone who's been through it. And I think that's an important aspect of Luke being able to say, sorry, man, you failed.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I noticed too here that the Emperor has that line that says, "You, like your father, are now mine." I thought that was an interesting like precursor to then later on Luke says, "I'm a Jedi like my father before me." It's kind of a nice little precursor, and kind of comes back at that point.
Using his own logic against him and using his own argument against him. And I don't think we probably give David Prowse enough credit for the physical acting that he does inside that Vader suit, because like we don't get to see Vader's face, so like there are so many things that we just have to take away from the slightest movement of his head or of his his arms, his shoulders, and so that's a great point, man. And we probably need to make sure that we say that Vader has some very small mannerisms that you go like, sometimes it's the way he cuts his head, like he turns his head really fast, and you're like, it's almost like I forget that Vader's not making facial expressions.
Mm-hmm. It almost allows you to
right.
kind of read what expression it is into the face of his helmet, and I think like one of the biggest moments in this movie is when the Emperor's electrocuting Luke, and you have that shot of him slowly turning his head while it's happening. I mean, it's such a simple shot, and yet there's so much gravity in that moment of him watching his one and only son like on the verge of being destroyed in front of him.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Now, I guess one last thing. Let's talk a little bit about that final space battle for a second. One thing that bothers me about it, I don't know if I'm just nitpicking here, but why is there enough room for the ships to be flying around inside the Death Star? Because it makes for a great cinematic piece and everything. And so if I switch my brain off, like it's fine, but I couldn't help this time being like, like is that a design flaw? Like what exactly is going on there?
I've always assumed it's like a construction corridor, because like you have to be able to get in there and navigate within to like real life ships, like cruise ships, they have a ton of those like interior corridors that like sometimes you have to get to this one thing and you might only have to work on it once in 100 years, but when you have to get to it, like there's only one way to get in there to work on it. So like the main reactor core, I've assumed that like this corridor exists so that during the construction process, this is how they moved things to the interior parts of the battle station. That battle scene, though, I think is one of the best of the whole like 8 or 9 film series now, wherever we stand, including the prequels. I just think that space battle is so good.
The stakes are so high at that point because, they come in thinking that this is our opportunity to end everything. Tables get turned on them. I mean, they're literally surrounded, fighting for their lives at that point.
And I love that Lando's like, well, I tell you what we're not going to do. We're not going to, like, tuck our tails between our legs and leave our people on the forest moon for dead. Like, that's what we're not going to do. I just thought that's such a great... Because, obviously that's the logical thing to do, but you forget that if they turn and leave, it's all for nothing. So they say, well, let's just kill as many Star Destroyers as we can. And if this is it, then by golly, like, they're going to know we were here.
Yeah, and it shows how dedicated the rebels are to their cause, because not only are they fighting for their lives, but they're fighting for their future, the future of the whole galaxy. They know that this could very well be their last stand. So even if we're going to get destroyed, we're taking some of them with us, because this was not all for nothing.
Yeah, it definitely shows you, how scrappy the Rebel Alliance is, because, I mean, they're literally just doing anything they can at that point to survive, and to even, just take out those Star Destroyers. I mean, you have, some ships doing just kamikaze runs, not necessarily on purpose, but, I mean, they're just crashing into them and taking them out left and right.
It's a 5-forward firepower!
It's the definition of a rock in a hard place. Like, on one hand, they've on one side they've got the Death Star, and then the other side they have an entire fleet of Star Destroyers. It just shows how the magnitude of the Empire and how small the rebellion is in comparison.
Yeah. Why did they build a second Death Star? If we're going to go there, like, why in the world would you do that again?
It was the most powerful weapon in the universe.
I think maybe they just assumed it was luck. I still wonder that. Even with Rogue One, explaining how they got the plans and everything, it's like, okay, well then when you get to Return, like, did they just figure out, like, oh, he shot into this exhaust port, let's just cork that thing up real quick and we'll be good to go.
Instead, let's leave a giant corridor that you could fly a whole ship into.
I will say though, the unfinished Death Star looks way cooler than the finished one.
It's super cool. It's way cool.
It looks awesome.
I've always kind of read into it that, I mean, that's why the Empire had the shield around it, is because they recognize that, hey, this is an incomplete project. Like, there are some gaping holes in this that can be exploited. So let's put this shield around it to protect it.
Yeah, that's why they couldn't attack it straight off the bat anyway. They had to wait for Han and the rebel convoy on the forest moon of Endor to get that shield down before they could even get in there.
Great point.
Which, quickly to Alex's point about the Ewoks, though, there is a line by the Emperor saying that he sent a legion of his best troops down to the moon to protect the shield generator, and yet it's those same best troops that got bested by the Ewoks.
By Teddy Bear.
A droid worshipping Ewoks. Ha ha ha. It's so terrible.
But 3PO's gold, and they are a primitive species. They've probably never seen gold before, and shiny means good.
Yeah. Trita Dogra. This guy's wise, loud and short.
That's guy's wise. Does Return of the Jedi have one of the best lines ever by an Imperial? You rebel scum. I love that guy so much.
Classic. And
you rebel scum.
And I love the guy at the beginning, the admiral or whatever he is that meets Vader when he lands on the Death Star, and when Vader informs him that the Emperor is coming, like, the look of terror on his face, and it shows that even amongst the Empire, they're all sort of afraid of one another in a way. There's an uneasiness even to the high-ranking Imperial officials. So, but yeah, I love that guy. We will double our efforts. Like, he gets this slight accent in that moment for some reason, and it's awesome.
And the fact that, like, he's a very real character, because he's like, I don't have enough men. What you're asking, like, I can't do this. This is what do you think I'm doing here?
This is stupid.
Maybe if I had an army of Wookiee slaves, but I mean, I don't have enough guys to do this. Like, that's such a real world problem
Exactly.
Like that every manager ever at any job at any level has always made that argument.
Yep.
I don't have the manpower to do this.
Well, let's go ahead, for the sake of trying to draw close to the end, let's go ahead and touch on favorite scene or part or what have you from this movie. And I'll start us off. I mean, I don't know, I feel like this gets mentioned frequently by fans, but I mean, honestly, just that whole dynamic between Luke, Vader, the Emperor, and the throne room, culminating in that final fight between Luke and Vader. Yeah, I have to agree with Alex. It is the most dramatic. There's just so much conflict going on in that scene under the surface. And then, I mean, that final, when Luke does finally snap, and the music going on at that moment.
There's so much desperation coming from it.
I mean, it gives me chills every time. And what's interesting too is there's, in a lot of ways, it's very much a role reversal from the fight against Vader and Empire, where, you know, right before Luke loses and gets his hand cut off, you know, Vader's kind of just hacking away at him, going across that bridge. And so it's almost the same thing where Luke is losing and he's just hacking away at Vader before taking off his hand. I mean, it's just so well done, and just how much the Emperor's enjoying that moment. It's just so entertaining. There's just so many things to love about it, and I don't know, for some reason too, it also sticks out to me every time that when Luke's getting electrocuted by the Emperor, and then the Emperor stops, and you get that like. It sticks out every time. It just sounds like he's in so much pain. It's so convincing. I'll give that one to Mark Hamill too. But just all of that. And I know, Jake, you mentioned before, and I was looking for it this time, is every time basically Luke ignites his lightsaber and starts attacking, like, that's a moment in which he is giving into the dark side.
A little bit,
and then he realizes it and shuts his lightsaber off again.
And that is a perfect way to tie into earlier. You know, Alex made the point that throughout this movie, Luke wears the solid black. I don't know if you guys have ever noticed, but in the moment where he's cut Vader's hand off, Vader's laying on the floor, the Empire comes over and basically tells him, you know, you've given in, like, you're there. And there's that moment of Luke where he looks at Vader's hand, or his, you know, the nub on his arm, and then he looks down at his own hand, the robotic one. When he turns back to face the Emperor, his black shirt has opened up, and there's a white shirt under that, and there's some symbolism there that he's wearing that under it to remind himself of the light. And there's just, it's very literary. You got to look into it at a very literary level, but yeah, there's such great symbolism there that, you know, even though he almost gives in a few of those moments, beneath
I know
it
exactly
all,
what you're talking about.
Beneath it all, he still has such a good heart.
I've seen it, and I've never thought about it. I just thought it was like, you know, the wardrobe, like, you know, flew open or whatever, and they just kept going. But I've never thought about it. But you're right, there, it's white under there.
He was just going so ham on Vader that his clothes started ripping apart.
Right.
Yeah.
Also, that's a great point, and I think it would be remiss, and I still want to hear your favorite moment. But on that, speaking of Nate, when the Emperor starts shocking Luke, we forget now because we've seen it so many times. But do you remember the first time you watched that movie? We have to remember, if you're in the audience in the theater the first time this movie's ever shown, like, you don't know exactly what's about to happen. You're like, okay, so Luke's like, he's not turned to the dark side, he's not going to kill Vader, so what's going to happen now? And then the Emperor starts freaking shooting lightning out of his hands. Like, we forget now, but that was the first time we've ever seen that. And, like, I remember the first time watching that movie, and I was like, well, what's going to happen now? oh my god, he's shooting lightning out of his hands. Like, how, like, the dude's evil.
That's new.
That's new. Like, and like, we also don't know, the only thing that we know about the Emperor at that point is like, we assume he uses the Force. Like, we know he does, but the only thing we see him do is unclasp the handcuffs. So like, then it's revealed, he suddenly reveals himself to be an extremely powerful Force user at that moment. And it suddenly adds, like, Darth Vader is dangerous, and we know he's dangerous, but like, I think for me, I never thought of the Emperor as dangerous outside of like his words. Like, yeah, he's conniving, yeah, he commands a fleet, yeah, he commands the Death Star, he's politically connected, but like, he's personally extremely dangerous.
Exactly.
And I think that's really interesting that we feel like the danger has passed now that Vader is defeated, only to realize that actually there's much more danger in this other figure in the room, that now we see that it's actually way worse than we think it is.
Yeah. I mean, I've already stated mine. I really love that scene of Luke and Vader, talking in that corridor before the fight. Just the intensity that Mark Hamill brings to that scene, and again, just briefly going back to his intensity throughout that entire bit. He, as we were saying during that fight, there are many times that he sort of loses it and toes the line, and I think we really see that for the first time actually at the very beginning of the movie when he first shows up, because the very first time you see Luke in Jabba's palace, he force chokes those pig guard people, and that's not a Jedi thing. That is that power is, generally speaking, exclusively to the Sith.
That's
so
a good point.
He sort of toes the line the entire movie, and so again that his wardrobe there is sort of representative of that. Like, as he's matured, he has got this newfound intensity. And, there are times when he very much toes the line between light and dark, but at the end of the day, he's very much good-hearted and, will always go to the light.
Oh, man, in a movie of great moments, an overall movie I don't love, but a movie in which there are several moments I do love. This is a hard question. I mean, the throne room has to be up there. But since it's already been stated, for the sake of not being the same, I will say the unmasking of Vader on the ramp to the shuttle always causes me to have an emotional reaction. Like, always. Like, let me look on you with my own eyes. And you're just like, oh! Like, I have spent 3 movies hating this guy, and now I'm suddenly heartbroken for him. Like, he's never seen his children with his own eyes. And then I would say, I also love Luke burning Vader on the pyre alone. Like, he doesn't invite anyone else. And part of that, probably to your point, and you're right, Jake, that we've in that moment it's easy to sympathize, but like, this dude has been really bad, and like, he has killed a lot of people, and like, how do you think, like, how is a Han Solo or a Lando going to react if Luke shows up with Vader's body? Like, Vader tortured Han. He took everything from Lando, everything. Like, despite what Luke says, like, they're not going to be like, oh, okay. They're going to be like, I don't care. Get that dude away from me.
Exactly.
So the fact that, like, he goes off by himself, builds the funeral pyre, and burns him, which is, again, I think there's something symbolic there, and I'm not really quite sure what it is, but like, it's I think of not to mention Lord of the Rings twice in one episode, but I think of Denethor in Return of the King, and he says, the heathen kings of old were burned, and that's always stuck with me. And I see that as like Vader does not get the send off that a Yoda or a Ben Kenobi get. Like, he doesn't get the disappearing and being absorbed into the Force that these powerful Jedi get. He has to be burned.
Yeah, and to answer the question that you didn't ask, the symbolism there is that in Luke's mind, Vader did redeem himself a bit in those last few moments, and he did become Anakin again. So Luke is giving him a proper Jedi funeral. Just going back to when you think about Episode 1, there's the scene of them burning Qui-Gon. That's the traditional Jedi way to dispose of their dead. So, that is Luke acknowledging the fact of, yes, he was a monster and whatever, but in his final moments, there was still some Anakin left. So, Luke believed that he deserved a proper Jedi send off.
And you could also say that it's kind of a purification ceremony in a way, because you notice that Luke put the helmet back on Anakin's body before burning him. He didn't keep it off or anything like that. He's back in his full Darth Vader garb, and yet that's almost being set on fire and burned away to symbolize that, that persona is gone and that Anakin was redeemed.
Yep.
That's a good point. And also maybe like, I'm going to burn this so no one can have it to put in a museum, or no one can have to like wear and pretend to be Vader. Maybe, there's also probably that, like, you don't want imposters. And so maybe, that's probably also which obviously, we don't want to get into Force Awakens, but obviously that kind of does happen. But
yeah, and I think Luke was trying to sort of be preemptive in that moment. He was trying, not so much imposters, but he was trying to at least do what he could to sort of destroy the memories of what Vader did, so that maybe there would be lesser chance of Vader inspiring anyone else to do the same things.
How cool is Lando in his cape? Like, he looks he is so out of place.
He's charming, man.
In that strategic meeting, like, all these people in like military garb or whatever, Lando is like in an upscale outfit with a flowing cape. It's just like, God, I love that character so
You can take
much.
the man out of Cloud City, but you can't take the Cloud City out of the man.
Exactly. Where did he even get this? They're floating in space. Like, where did he get this awesome outfit?
And with
you always make time for swag, my friend.
And I think Lando is a great note to end it on. Just the classiest dude in all of Star Wars.
All right, so yep, there it is. That is Return of the Jedi. Apologize if this turns out to be a longer episode, but totally worth it.
I think Return of the Jedi warrants it. This is... it's either my favorite, or it and A New Hope are perfectly tied up. And Empire is just barely a step under them. Like, if someone put a gun to my head and made me choose between any of these three movies, I legitimately don't know that I could do it. But I do have a very strong love for Return of the Jedi in particular.
That's really funny, and it's a good movie. Don't get me wrong, it is a good movie.
All right, well, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you all next time. I love the teddy bears just as much as anyone else. Oh.